So we're going to open this up on the most fundamental level. What is an armonia? One of the national musical symbols of Mexico, mariachi in its 100 years of urbanized practice has transformed into a world genre. Practitioners and academics alike tend to hold the conceptual division of instrumentation within the mariachi ensemble into two main categories, melodia, melody, and armonia, harmony. The melody and harmony sections of the mariachi ensemble work in tandem to provide the rich musical textures we enjoy. The former includes violins, trumpets, and vocals, where the melody section can be broken down into groups of homogeneous instruments. The armonia section is an amalgamation of singularly distinct instrumentation, akin to the function of a continuous section within a small chamber ensemble. Furthermore, the instruments of the armonia have some variation, always have been at the core of the originally rural mariachi musical groups, making the armonia a vital component when defining a mariachi ensemble. The photograph on the projected image is of the armonia section of Mariachi Vargas de Tecalitlan, a group that was founded in 1897. Considered the greatest armonia section of all time, this personnel was active from the mid-1950s into the early 1970s, marking Mariachi Vargas' seminal third generation. During this period, as an armonia section, Arturo Mendoza, Natividad de Santiago, Rigoberto Alfaro, and Victor Cárdenas' collaborative output cemented modern armonia performance practice. The influence of their combined creativity, the mastery of their instruments, and the technical developments that they influenced persist until the present day. All the audio recordings cited today are works that specifically feature this armonia section. These recordings are considered by professionals and academics canonical works within the mariachi tradition. The modern mariachi armonia comprises an arpa jalisciense, a harp from the state of Jalisco, or, as we feature today, an arpa jarocha, a harp from the state of Veracruz from the jarocho tradition. In either case, this is a diatonic harp with an average of 5 octaves across 36 strings. The guitarrón is a large vaulted back fretless mariachi bass. It's a fretless vaulted back mariachi bass. It utilizes 6 strings and is plucked in octaves. The vihuela is a small tenor range vaulted back mariachi guitar. And la guitarra is a standard nylon string classical guitar, which I will be playing today. And a guitarra de golpe, a flat back baritone guitar, are instruments that have distinct tunings and tessitures that function together as strummed instruments. So that's just a concise definition and explanation of these instruments.
So the ideas for this session was born from a series of discussions we've had over the years, recognizing that there are a variety of approaches to teaching the mariachi armonia. So our goal is to set a common ground for the foundations of armonia pedagogy for the mariachi ensemble. That being said, the depth and complexity of the armonia, both as individual instruments and as a whole, as a section, goes way beyond the scope of what we can cover in a 1-hour section. As such, if anyone has any questions after we're done, please feel free to reach out. We'll be in the hallway, we'll be here, or our emails will be shown at the end of the presentation as well.
Sorry for my voice. I lost it a couple days ago and kind of regaining it. So if I break out in my voice, my apologies. So we're going to go ahead and start off here with harp. To me, it's kind of important to understand that there's really 2 elements, the way I perceive it, to the development of harp. And the 2 pillars that split off really are the physical part of it, which is the finger dexterity and all the development of the physical portions of your hands and fingers, in addition to the mental development relative and surrounding the music theory. So, there's aspects of it where they're developed as individual pillars, but in reality, it should all be an integrated set where one talks to the other, and eventually what you'll see later in this part of the presentation is where the 2 elements, or the 2 pillars of physical and mental come together. So just kind of a recap here on the physical part. Basically, the way I like to start off my students is an element of just individual fingers, and so I have a series of exercises where they're just individual finger pulls essentially, which are controlled elements, and they develop strength and finger dexterity and independence. From the set of the finger exercises, then we go into the next unit of, I guess what I'll call the next level of integration into the hand, which is at the hand level, right? So you start developing a sense of the center of gravity or the center of balance of the hand relative to different string pulls, and you'll start seeing the kind of balance or imbalance of strength amongst the fingers, which you got to be checking yourself constantly to develop, your fingers against the hand independence. And that over those two exercises, which are relatively easy, they seem easy, but they're really not. You'll start finding gaps there that you can automatically calibrate your hand to. From there, you start incorporating the second hand, which if you're a right-handed person, you'll immediately find out that your left hand is kind of the slower one. Because this instrument is it's a very foreign instrument in the sense that if you don't have really tight coordination amongst both hands, this is a challenge in itself. So what I like to do is I'll start off the hands simultaneously doing exactly the same thing, both left, right, and you'll start to develop a sense of which hand starts lagging behind the other. And so that gives you an ability to once again calibrate both hands and kind of maintain a balance amongst both hands. Once both hands start getting developed, you'll start developing the ability to go kind of what I call like autonomous mode, where in your left hand you can start playing the different styles of mariachi, which is son, ranchera, corrido, huapango, and automatically your left hand, if you center it, if you focus your mind to play a particular rhythm, without thinking, your left hand just starts kind of doing it, and then you have the bandwidth now to start playing around with different melodies and different things like that, which in my opinion and in my experience, that's been a very intuitive way of developing the style of, not even the style, the basic fundamentals of playing with both hands from a physical side. On the mental side, one thing that's been very successful for me is really just digging back into the basics of music theory, basic key signatures, diatonic scale, chromatic scale. One of the first questions that many kids or people starting harp will ask is, how do I tune this thing, right? So without the knowledge of knowing what a diatonic scale is, you won't be able to really figure out, how to tune it. You combine that with a key signature, and now you have some semblance of how you tune this thing, at the very least, right? So you can get into the circle of fifths, that whole elemental part of the theory, and then start applying elements of rhythm and sight reading to that. Mainly because in the education setting, there's a lot of sheet music that's written, and one of the elements of harp that's kind of interesting in my opinion is that there's not a lot of specific harp music. So you're kind of relegated to trying to figure out a system amongst the guitarrón music and the rhythm music and trying to figure out how to incorporate melodies, right? So for me, I believe that, the inclusion of music theory and elemental studies for harp is really the glue that allows the student to flourish and start understanding the ties between rhythm, harmony, chord structures, and really what to do when you don't have harp music, right? So it's kind of an interesting gap that still needs to be addressed, but without actually specifically writing harp music, it's been successful in my approach to harp to students. That's a positive way to kind of get the light bulb turned on. In addition to that, some chord building inversions factors into that, and then learning the function of chords within the song styles. Like I mentioned, son, a ranchera, a huapango, which we'll go through some of those styles a little bit later. So from my perspective, like Carlos mentioned, this is really, years worth of studying, but if I were to put a framework around it, this is kind of the two elements, the two individual pillars, I should say, that harp development falls under, with elements of tying between the two, which we'll demonstrate in future songs.
Thank you, Adrian. So I'm going to focus more on the physical aspects of playing guitarrón. As some of you guys might know, guitarrón is a fairly physically demanding instrument. as such, as guitarron players or as directors teaching guitarron, we should aim for efficiency of movement and efficiency of energy that is muscle expenditure when performing. So I'm going to start, with the big elephant in the room. Should the guitarron be used on the right shoulder or the left shoulder? I know there's a bit of friendly competition amongst guitarron players to use it on the right and the left. Really, the benefit of holding it on the left shoulder, over the head on the left shoulder, is that it is a more secure hold. This might be something that's preferable for beginning guitarron players, younger kids who might not be as experienced with holding expensive instruments. You might want to have them have a little bit more, a little bit better hold on the instrument. On the flip side, placing the guitar on the right shoulder allows for faster and easier ways to get in and out of the playing position. This is especially true when wearing a sombrero. If you ever try to take off a sombrero, take off your guitarron while wearing a sombrero over the left shoulder, it's kind of a pain. I personally have a bias towards using it on the right shoulder. That is the way I was taught from the beginning. This is also the same way that the members of the Santiago family use their instrument. But it is, however, important to note that Naki Santiago himself stated in his book that neither way is incorrect. That is, both ways are fine. Now, as far as the stance goes, we want to make sure that we reduce the amount of movement our bodies make, both side to side and front to front, back to front when we're playing. So, like any instrument, we want to stand with our legs shoulder width apart, kind of as straight as you can, not like straight, but straightish. The position of the guitarron, give me 1 second to get my guitarron, please. The position of the guitarron should be, let me show you. This part of the base on the bottom should be around the place of the sternum. Thank you. So, about right here. Not too high, not too low. If you play too low, you're not going to be in a position to pull, in the optimal position to pull. The nut should be around the shoulder. Really, it should be right around the place where your arm would naturally fall if you're holding it like this without using any force to hold it, left or right. The body should be tilted slightly forward, so not flat, not front. Neither of those positions allow for optimal pull. And the body, of course, should also be slanted, left to right, down in the downward position. We don't want it, kind of parallel to the floor. We don't want it held like a tololoche or a upright base, and we don't want it down. Neither of those allows for our hands to be in the most efficient position possible, because like I said, we are focusing on muscle efficiency, the least amount of muscle expenditure as we can, because like I said, guitarron is a very demanding instrument. Onto the pull. So, the pull of the guitarron, I like to liken it to doing a karate chop. So let me demonstrate. Pretend my guitarron is a brick that I'm trying to break. I'm going to be kind of like this, right? So instead of doing it like that with our hand up and down, our hand should be parallel to the floor, and our pull is going to be up and to the back. We do not want to use the guitarron as a pivot. What I mean is, we don't want to do this. It takes a lot more energy to pivot on your forearm than it does just to pick up the whole arm itself. Not only that, but using our guitarron as a pivot deadens the sound a bit. It might not be very noticeable, but it does happen. So you don't want to place as little as pressure as possible on the guitarron itself. And when you pull, your arm does actually pull away from the guitarron. You don't use the guitarron as a pivot. As far as your right hand goes, when you're going to pull, your hand should always be in the form of an L. If you're doing, for example, a D, it's going to be the form of an L with the forefinger. If you're going to do, for example, an A, a B, or a B flat, it would be in the form of an L with these fingers. So it should be. I'm going to tilt it a little forward, like I said not to, but just to demonstrate. So D, so L, and A. onto the press, pressing the strings might be the hardest thing for young students to do. They don't have calluses, they don't have the finger strength. So that being said, we need to use the least amount of pressure possible. We need to make sure we teach them to use leverage to their advantage. Okay? And also we always want to keep our hands in about the form of a fist. Not a fist like this, but your natural position when your hand is at rest. We don't hold our hands like this, we don't hold our hands in a fist. Usually they're kind of like that, you know? You're resting, they're just like that. That's the position our hands should be in for the most part when playing guitarron. For example, if you're playing E, it keeps it in that natural position. F, it keeps it in a natural position. We don't want the thumb away. The only time we move the thumb is when we're going to use it for leverage. And I'll demonstrate that after this. We keep it in a fist, or as close to a fist as possible without using muscle to hold it. So again, F, E, F. Another thing important to note is we don't want to bend our pinky finger back. Remember, we have to remember that the ring finger and the pinky finger are on the same tendon. And when we move the pinky back, it is taking away strength from the ring finger. So we want to make sure our pinky finger is always in the same position as the ring finger and the middle finger. It's not going to be touching the string. It's going to be a little bit off from the string. It might be a little bit in back. It might be a little bit forward, but it's never going to be pulled back like this because that takes away strength. As far as leverage goes, I'm really only have time to demonstrate it on one note, and that's going to be E flat. E flat is probably the bane of existence for most guitarron players. You know, it's really not that hard. So the way you do it, you put your palm up against the neck of the board, and all you do is bring your fingers down. You don't pull these back. You put it up, bring them down, and you use your thumb as leverage. You're pushing up on the back of the neck, or the back of the neck or the head, right? And that's it. That's where you're going to use leverage to our advantage. And not all of the notes use that leverage, but some of them do. E flat, you know, G sharp also, because it's kind of hard to press G sharp if you're just using one finger. If you're pushing up with your thumb while you push on the G sharp, it's a lot easier. The last bit of advice I can give to those building up strength in the left hand and the right hand is get your students or get yourself a racquetball, and you can use it. I have some in my backpack if anybody wants them after the presentation. And you can use it either to squeeze individual fingers. You know, they're not so hard that you can't squeeze them, but they do take some force to squeeze, and that'll help you build up the finger muscles in your fingers on the left hand and the right hand. And onto the wood and guitar.
Some of the fundamental things that I try to instill in students whenever I'm working with them, whether they're beginning students or they're students who have been playing for a long time, I ask, usually in a practice setting, they're seated next to me, we're not standing, we're not in traje, we're not in our suits or anything like this. So in that sense, it's not like a formal performance, but I always ask, do you have your strap? And they look shocked. They say, well, I'm not performing. I'm not going to be standing. And so what I try to encourage, I try to tell them, in order to keep your instrument consistent relative to your body, it would behoove you to have your strap, your tali. And so this always stays on my instrument. For most students, they'll compartmentalize it somewhere else. I usually just get my strap, place it the other end of the sound hole. La vihuela does the same. And then the two are never apart. It's kind of, it's set it, right? We set it and we leave it there. But why using that? Because we have the advantage that when we're practicing, whether in a standing or seated position, the instrument does not change. The position of the instrument doesn't change. So here I am standing and then seated. And that develops consistency because I notice with other students, and even I have the habit, practicing without a strap, what will happen is that, my arms are in completely different positions. My left arm is overextended and my right arm is compressed. Right, so we want to have the strap help the instrument come to us where it's going to be most optimal for us to play. The right hand goes down the center of the body, kind of where your shirt buttons are. This is a good position to have for the right hand. The left hand should not exceed the height of the shoulder, the wrist. And so if your strap is in an optimal position, at least for guitar, you'll see that my right hand is kind of still within the groove. It's not right or far left. Also, the left hand wrist is not up here. I know some students play like this. I've seen students like this. Again, a 45-degree angle is optimal just to leverage the strength in the wrist. So our wrist is never overly bent. It's not like this either, not like this. It's kind of just in a very neutral position. Opening and closing the fist in a neutral position. That's optimally what we do to reach these chords. I have a lot of students whose hands are much larger than mine. And say, I can't play E flat like this. Say, well, let's adjust the height of the neck. Let's see how far front or back you are. And that helps them tremendously. If all else fails and they get really tired, I say, let's leverage the strength of our arm, the weight of our arm, kind of like think of it as a grip from the thumb going forward, not the fingers going into the fingerboard, and then pull down as if you're going to rip the neck off of the body of the instrument. And that seems to trigger other larger muscle groups and get some attention and focus away from that. Okay. I know vihuela is a much more reduced instrument, but the principles still apply. We're going to want to have the strumming position of the vihuela is in between the sound hole and the neck. So that's ideally where we would want to have that center line going down on the right hand. Notice both shoulders are pretty even. If you see uneven shoulders, that's going to create a lot of tension. And then vihuela and guitar are almost at the same angle, almost a 45 degree. All right, we're not playing like this or like this. That's something that's really going to help the students. Foundational, right? Okay. Yeah. Every student, regardless of the level, can really appreciate some of the benefits of including these techniques. In all reality, everyone's at a different level, even if they're just beginners. Some people have a propensity for learning chord shapes a lot quicker. One thing that Ismael wanted to mention about that was that you always want to also have, on the micro level, you want to have a gap between the angular part of the thumb and the neck, so it's not suffocating the instrument. The guitar is a very well-braced instrument. It's been developed over a long time. The vihuela has a lot less bracing in it, so it's much more temperamental in that way. And I'll show you what will happen with just the pressure of just one hand. Go ahead and play for us, Ismael. Trust me, it's very light pressure on the bridge. So if you see your students, that are digging in, their shoulders are uneven, that's going to actually be counterintuitive. If your students have, shoulders that are uneven and they're digging into the instrument or putting a lot of weight in the right arm, that's actually counterproductive to the type of sound that they're going to make. And another thing, these instruments are extremely, these are directional instruments. Where the sound hole is pointing is where the sound is going to go. They're gonna wave and oscillate where that projected sound is. So if they're holding their instruments in a lower angle, it's going to throw that off. And so, vihuela is a very sensitive type of instrument. So using finger pressure that is just the fingertips, not trying to leverage all of that. Let's move on now. Some music. So now integrated, right? We get to some of the foundational things, and then we go to the integration of the armonía within the mariachi ensemble. The first song that we're going to feature is El Rey. It's a canción ranchera, and it's una canción ranchera híbrida. It's a hybrid song form that alternates between ranchera vaciada and ranchera lenta in 3/4 time and 2/4 time. This also features a metronomic modulation. In 3/4 time, the beat is actually the division of the beat, the pulse for the 2/4 time. So here's just steady pulse, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. When we move over to 2/4, it's 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1, or up to 4 if you want to write it out in 4. So this pulse is always consistent. Let's go ahead and play through the introduction. Original tempo that we started off with. If you listen to this specific recording, it's very, very much intentional in that way. That's one of the things that maybe you won't perform it that way, but this is a great way to rehearse your armonias, to get them aware of divisions and subdivisions, especially for something as complicated as this with contratiempos and things of that nature. At the beginning level, for vihuela and guitar, I try to tell them to develop an internal sense of rhythm, so they have an inner mechanic. I try to reduce all motion, external motion. This is not, a knock at anyone or anything, but I see a lot of 1, 1, 1. What I say is like, why don't we focus more externally for the 1? Let's actually wait for the guitarron. See where that pulse is and have that expectation there with an internal device. This is something that was taught to me by Chuy Hernandez of Sol de Mexico. When they play their rancheras, they're thinking teca tan tan teca tan tan. So the guitarron part is subdivided, and the other 2 strikes are not. Teca tan 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 teca tan. And that kind of gives an internal sense of where they should be, where they could be. For guitarron.
For guitarron, if you're looking at beginner students, also depending on the key you're doing it, you're going to want to simplify some of the runs. There aren't many in the song, but simplify them, and also just reduce the amount of accidentals, especially like if you're doing it in A, you're going to want to reduce the G sharp maybe. If like runs with G sharps.
Want to do that one first? Con dinero y sin dinero, hago siempre lo que quiero, y mi palabra es la ley. Okay, that was a simplified version. It doesn't have the accidental. Totally okay with doing that. Let's play the way it's recorded. Con dinero y sin dinero, hago siempre lo que quiero. Okay, he was listening to me. He got distracted. There it is. Yeah. Okay. So there's nothing wrong with reducing. Making things simple and accessible for them.
Okay, so moving on to the harp, like I mentioned, it becomes really difficult to try to coordinate hands, right off the bat, and so I believe there's kind of like somewhat of a misconception where right off the bat, it might seem like a logical thing to do, but most people want to start off with just kind of doing the 3/4 pattern. And as simple as that looks, it really isn't, right? And so what ends up happening is the student's mind kind of gets caught up in knots, and really they start focusing away from the song and start trying to focus on their hands, and it just becomes an experience that they're not really integrated into the group, right? So for me, my mindset in teaching my students is you want to have your mindset not only focused so much on the harp, but your ears and your eyes and your mind also, like we mentioned, integrated into the mariachi or to the rhythm section. So one of the key elements of doing that is really just focusing on the bass, right? If you can get a good understanding, going back to the exercises, right? Your separation of octaves. Sorry. Right? literally just matching what the bass is doing. As simple as it sounds, that takes a lot of bandwidth in the student's mind to just kind of get that coordination right. One of the big things too, that not only is physically playing, going back to the elements right earlier, you want to make sure that the student is able to understand why they're playing those notes, right? It's because the rhythm is in a certain, or the Armonia section is a certain chord, and then they start developing the elements of, okay, so what are the bass notes that are part of that chord, right? And so, for me, there's a lot more, I guess, cognitive learning that goes on versus trying to just stuff all the physical stuff in the beginner side of the house, right? And so, yeah, for me, one of the elements from a beginner harp standpoint is if they can get some very basic fundamentals down in terms of octave separation, clear tone, a clear sound, an understanding of the pulse, the rhythmic pulse as a section, and making sure to blend with the bass, right, and keeping the bass going throughout. In that sense, you're also really honoring the tradition where the bass continues to play as the harp has, you know, in the Mariachi Vargas legacy, in particular, Don Arturo Mendoza, which is based off of like a Michoacan type harp playing. So, yeah, in terms of harp, like I mentioned, some key elements, understanding of time, rhythm, chord progressions. Don't get too fancy just yet.
Okay, at the more intermediate levels, we're going to focus more on the actual tone production, right? Timing, but then how are we using our hands? How are we executing to, you know, play the second and third beats? I'm going to have these minds talk a little bit about tone and balance within the instrument.
Normally for your right hand, igual up there, so sorry. Or igual up there, and normally your left hand. I see a lot of beginner students, you hear them playing all the time. Sometimes you just show them how to strum up and down. So I would help them, and normally the rancheras, what we're practicing right now, it's normally played with one finger. It's not played with 2, 3, 4. There is the rasgueos where you end, where you add more fingers to get sound full. But normally this is what you really want to hear. That's one finger. Now you do 2. 3, 4. You hear this a lot with students, so it's only one finger for rancheras.
Then you have that option. But if you have the other instruments of the armonia, the whole point is to blend, right? Because if the armonia sounds, you know, a little bit too far out on the guitar, we need to blend as a section. We're essentially the left hand, you know, one left hand on a piano, the bass and the accompanying chord. But, you know, not 3 pianos and each one playing that respective part as loud as possible, right? We have to function as one complementary division. Yeah, for guitar, I would just say strike. Let's try the intro to after the da 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 da, and then we can strike there. So you'll hear the difference, you know, in the cadence points when there is a stop at the end of the phrase. Bum bum bum. As opposed to maybe a more generous type of sound, it would. Why? Because then the instruments, you know, maybe are over-modulating, and then the blend, when you lose that blend, that harmonic blanket, and it becomes more about the percussive aspects of playing.
So for intermediate guitarron players, again, depending on the key, you might need to reduce the amount of accidentals, but really for the most part, by the intermediate stage, students should be able to play accidentals in most keys, maybe except for like, you know, F sharp, C sharp, G sharp. So any of the regular keys, I think you might, and by reducing accidentals, I'm not saying to take them out of the music. I'm saying, like, for example, on a bass run, you know, you change the bass run to make it a little bit more simple. But we also want to start focusing on the time, like Adolfo had mentioned, like keeping that rhythmic, what was the term? Yeah, the rhythmic underpinning from the 3/4 to the 2/4, have them focused on that a little bit more. It's very important, especially when you get up into the advanced stages.
And from here, I mean, this is one of the songs that's really accessible for anyone, entry point into the Armonia tradition. And really, if you find that they're breezing through this, then for my Armonia, they say, okay, we're going to transpose it into a lot of different keys now, right? We have the function of 5/7 and 5, in that chorus part, and it just helps them get associated with key signatures and different harmonic, simple but harmonic progressions to 4 and 5.
Okay, so for harp, like I mentioned, once you've got some kind of understanding of the physical elements, especially in a ranchera, which isn't too complicated, right? You want to focus on the tone and the physical separation of the octave, the hand balance, center of gravity, all that fun stuff that I mentioned earlier. One thing that I think starts becoming apparent if you start incorporating the theory part of it is you start getting an understanding of, one, opportunities of melody, which is where the trumpets and the violins and vocalists might be silent or not, so that you don't clash, right? You get a sensitivity for not just going crazy and playing whatever you can play. But the other part too is figuring out, what can you play during those opportunities, right? And so a lot of that is pinned in the music theory part of, if you can understand where the rhythm section is going, where the bass note is leading the harmonia section, you can start figuring out using a root position, a first inversion, second inversion, just some little things to incorporate as an embellishment. So maybe let's try, after the intro, Dios te bien, que estoy afuera. So all I'm really doing is just doing passing tones. It's in the same chord, but I'm just really messing around with inversions and the full inversion, or I can do it in 6 harmonies. Right, and I'm just really outlining the chord. Or you can do thirds. Right, all I'm doing is going from first inversion to second, the octaves on the outside, and then the third harmony. So those are some, I would say intermediate elements that you can start incorporating with harp students once they get a beginning understanding of the physical element, the understanding of rhythmic elements, and where they can start just incorporating little toquecitos or little embellishments of melodic without overwhelming the song, right? So it starts becoming a sensitivity to all of that and incorporating all those types of techniques, physical and theoretical, into the playing.
Okay, moving on, next feature is El Relámpago. It's a son jalisciense or son de mariachi. Although for practical purposes, everyone transcribes it, the most common convention of transcribing this is in 3/4, but we really have a lot of Gothic accents within that, from 3/4 to 6/8, what we call a sesquialtera or sesquialtera, which is a word that identifies this type of rhythmic compositional device. It's really a phrase, el seis que se altera, sesquialtera. So the six, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're shifting between 3/4 and 6/8. This is a convention also that's used in Arabic music, and I think that's where it comes into Spain, and then from Spain to Mexico, and it's found throughout all of Latin America, not just in mariachi music. But that's actually what we're going to do when we simplify the part for the armonías at beginner level. We want them to play the sesquialtera with a simplified song pattern. So the song pattern would be, but we're really going to make them play instead of the redobles, this pattern here. Down, up. And that way you don't get them encumbered and you get them used to anchoring within the guitarron. Again, the external device is good, but if we have internal cues to what to listen for, this has, beginning students really have some trouble. It gets them playing sones right away and gets them understanding it on a much more fundamental level.
So for going off of what Adolfo said, we're for beginning guitar, we're just going to simplify the rhythm, just like what I was playing, like such, like the beginning, you know? So yeah, we're just, I mean, dun, 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 I mean, it's just really, quarter rest, quarter note, and then the two beats of the eighth rest, quarter, eighth rest, quarter.
So for harp, in terms of songs too, one thing that I find kind of interesting to teach students is that same pattern, more particularly the 6/8 part. And usually what's worked for me with students, I literally just break it down as 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so as we play through it and count through it, they start to get an understanding of that swing, right? So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because later we'll start adding and you kind of start getting a feel for that little hop, which, you know, it's either this or the son Huasteco. But for a beginner, for me, for harp, that's really the most important part, so that they can contribute to the song through just the bass for now.
And then intermediate levels, that's where I would introduce a redoble. I would introduce that redoble and then the concept of a contratiempo. Contratiempo literally translates to counter-tempo. It's a literal translation, but what it is, a contratiempo is a term used in Spanish for when you're late, you arrive late to something. You know, I was going somewhere, said, me puso un contratiempo. There was a train, you know, and it made me late to the presentation or whatever. So, and what that means is that typically in a 3/4 solid time, the hand is strumming down on the downbeat. 1, 2, 3. In a contratiempo, the hand is moving up on a downbeat. 1, 2, 3, 1. And the way you get to that is by repeating one of the directions, typically a down strum. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It sounds radically different. And we're just shifting over the agogic accent to the upbeat of that. And that's where I start introducing those concepts.
Okay, so for the advancing and intermediate and advancing guitar, we're pretty much going to be played as recorded. We do want to focus on the timing of the bass, you know, trying to follow the traditional feel of the mariachi armonia and the mariachi guitarra.
So for harp, like I mentioned earlier, that's kind of where the fun part starts to take shape. Where now you're playing with both hands, trying to interweave in the rhythm. And in reality, if you go back and you look at videos of players from Michoacan or from rural areas of Jalisco, or very old recordings of Mariachi Vargas and Marmolejo, right, things like that, what you'll start finding is harp is really, it's not a main melodic piece in terms of the ensemble. It's really just the harmonic accompaniment. And all I'm really doing is just playing with the beats. 1, 2, 3, and as simple as it sounds, it brings a really beautiful, like, traditional element to the rhythm section. Can we do just the song, this pattern, and so that we can hear? Just yeah, sorry. So it's very simple, but it sounds really, in my opinion, it sounds really cool, and not a lot of people get to appreciate that, because another interesting thing for me in harp is that the way the harp is played in live performance is not the way that it's recorded. So in a lot of recordings, you won't really hear that, but when you go see a concert, you're like, well, what are they doing? They're not just playing their left hand. So it's kind of this weird, like, if you know, you know type thing. But in my opinion, the reason I was able to figure that out, aside from getting taught, was through recordings and just kind of figuring out, like, what's that little sound that's going on in between. And it really, I found that to be, those are the gaps of what these guys are playing. So,
And then, so one of the things that we can do is because the rhythms that are simplified do interlock, you can always feature them together. So if you have a blend of students that are at distinct levels, or there's a deficit there in some kind of ability or just time playing, you can always combine these rhythms together. Let's move on to our last example. La Viquina, also recorded by Mariachi Vargas in this time period. You'll see the Armonia featured there in some of the photographs. It's a joropo mexicano. So joropo is a song formed from originally Venezuela, Colombia. Again, features a lot of sesquieltera. But the accents for that type of musical tradition are on the offbeats of 2 and 3. 1. So for play. Highly syncopated, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3. But right? Joropo Mexicano, for the most part, a lot of musicians during the tours with Pedro Infante would visit Colombia, the South American countries, started listening to this other folk music that those countries have. And when they brought these rhythms back, they started inventing and composing their own joropo. So the joropo Mexicano is a lot heavier on 3, and on the first beat of the 3/4. And we can really appreciate that in this recording, where you hear, instead of, you hear emphasis on the first part of the beat and not that syncopated. I know Ismael was going to talk a little bit more about the blend there.
Okay, so on that part, when looking more advanced rhythms, just I showed us the open for that type of rhythm. That's a little more advanced techniques for those type of rhythms.
So if we just play the way it's notated, it's not really going to have every little, micro kind of expression there. Can we just play it really straight? 1, 2, 3, 2, 2. Now we're going to start adding the little elements of dynamic contrast and blending the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2. For beginners, I would just say, we'll focus on one apagón within the measure, typically on 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and they're anchored in that second part of the measure. And you can, the beginners can interlock with the intermediate and advanced and practice it that way, because all the rhythms are, they line up, and that helps them stay steady too. If you have, advanced students that can assist in that. Guitarra?
So for guitarra, we're going to simplify the rhythms that we're playing. Adolfo, can we do the intro real quick?
Sure. Yeah.
We can be another full demonstrator.
The simple one. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3.
So yeah, just a simplified pattern, simplified notes on for the beginners.
Yeah. So here's a transcription that I produced of the second turn through, the second time on the repeat measure. I mean, you can see a lot of activity happening on the first beat. Everything is different on the first beat. Typically, it's just like a big quarter note. That's really the effect, and whether the quarter note is arpeggiated blurred, or whether it has a kind of a redoble at the beginning, that's really what's emphasizing and keeping that drive on 1.
yeah, so for the unifying theme for me, the beginners, if the harp player can play the bass parts with the guitarra player and have an understanding of what's happening harmonically, even if they're not playing chords on the right hand, for me, that's the goal of what I'm trying to teach at the beginner level for harp.
do the same thing for the son in La Viquina for an intermediate level. We want to start introducing more technical things like the rasgueados, definitely the redobles, and effects like 16 notes. That's typically like the development. I'll give them the basic division of the beat, and then we'll get into subdivisions of the beat.
For guitarron, you can, I would suggest maybe, there's 3 distinct guitarron patterns in the song. Each melody phrase has its own distinct rhythm, its own distinct pattern. I would suggest maybe just doing one of those patterns. The first one, that's the kind of the easiest one, and you could just do that one the 3 times. And then not until they get to the advanced, and they can do all of the three different patterns that are there for guitarron.
For harp at an intermediate level, what I would recommend for this song is just outlining the chords of the song, because the melodies are so complex and they're running through essentially the whole song. You don't want to clash with them. If anything, if you can complement by playing the same thing, that'll be probably, I think, what I would say the maximum tolerance for harp in terms of adding something extra. But I think for this particular song, if you can play the bass, if you can understand where the chords are going, and if you can outline that on the right hand, that's pretty much your intermediate level of expectations for harp.
And just moving on to advanced, you always have the option of blending. If you have vihuela players that are very enthusiastic about playing and they want to add all the embellishments, that's completely fine. In this generation of Vargas, this is really one of the things that they enabled, and one of the things that they enacted was that, yeah, the guitar will play like a much more simplified version, not because it can't play exactly what the vihuela plays, but then that also frees them up. That frees it up so that the vihuela can add embellishments and flurries and things like that. And that's totally fine in this. Every performance I've seen of Vargas in videos and archival recordings, when you have the guitar and the vihuela balanced out, and you can hear both of them and appreciate it, they're doing almost complementary rhythms most of the time.
Like I said, for guitarron, you can use the 3 distinct patterns for the melody, for each melody section. For harp.
For advanced harp, what I would recommend is, at this point, you can start intertwining the actual melody of the song and kind of act as a soloist, where the director or the arranger of the song, the director of the group can swap out different melodic parts and have the harp play instead of the violins or the trumpets, and basically give a larger responsibility to the harpist, because physically and theoretically they're able to keep up with the song and able to execute that.
Play a little bit of the melody in that to illustrate some of that. I've also produced for Armonia, at least for guitarron, and we have the full charts, so you can email me and I can send those out to you as I hear them on the recording, okay? So